Hello, Lynn Watts with Wyatt the Wonder Dog Books. And today I'm going to talk about self esteem. So, what is self esteem? Well, let me just begin by saying that I think that in some ways it's a relatively new concept. I know when I was a kid, which granted was a very, very long time ago, I don't think many people worried about self esteem. At least that's not what we called it. What did parents and teachers worry about? I think they worried about kids behaving. They worried about kids getting along. They worried about kids doing well in school or sports or whatever was important to them or whatever talent they had. But I don't recall anybody really worrying about my self-esteem or anybody else's. We then went through kind of a phase where that's all we worried about. And I think parents, educators, myself included, spent a lot of time telling kids good job, telling them they were all special, which all is true. We are all special. But we weren't really very specific. And so we kind of brought kids up knowing that they were special and that they could accomplish things, but we really didn't help them understand what that meant or how to do that. I think we've come a long way since then, thanks to Carol Dweck and her whole idea of growth mindset. And I think that contributes a lot to self esteem. So let me just give you a definition of self esteem. Positive self esteem, which of course is what we're all looking for, is a realistic, and realistic is really key, I think, realistic, balanced sense of self worth that is rooted in effort, growth, and character. So there's a whole lot of things that are kind of all balled up in that and that contribute to that. It is having some confidence, but it's also having an understanding and confidence that mistakes are okay and that we all make mistakes, that we all have things we're good at, things that we're not good at, and feeling good about ourselves anyway. So it's not just this general idea of always feeling good about ourselves and that we can accomplish anything. It's more having a very realistic idea of what it takes to accomplish things and that we're capable. We're capable of doing that. So, all that being said, what are some things that we should avoid saying that don't really help um, children develop a positive sense of self esteem? And let me just say from the start, these are all things that we've all said, myself included. And they're not really bad things. I think they're just not the best thing that we could say. So when we give just kind of global labels to a child, like, wow, you made 100 on the test, you are so smart. All right. The trouble with those kind of labels, and it's not just smart, it could be anything, it could be athletic. Wow, you scored, in the big game. You're so athletic. You do such a great job. Again, great job. Um, it doesn't really help a child understand how they got there. And so there's kind of this sense that you just sort of magically, you're smart, you're magically athletic or musical. And certainly there is some element of talent that may be involved in all of these things, but it also doesn't help kids understand where to go with that. So for many kids, and this is what a lot of Carol Dweck's work found, was that kids who got this label, let's just say of being smart, they were told they were smart, then when they got in an environment, whatever that might be, where they were challenged and they didn't feel smart, they felt like a failure. They kind of had this image of themselves that they had to be smart all the time and everything. And they also would often become children who didn't try hard things because they didn't want to find out that they weren't smart. All right. So I hope I'm making sense with this. So you're smart. I think it's okay to say that sometimes, but we also need to help kids understand what it took to get to this point where that's what we notice. So it doesn't help them understand the effort and the practice and the study or whatever went into that success. All right, so global labels are not generally helpful for self-esteem. Comparison, I think we all know this, that we don't compare one child with another, but sometimes we do it without even thinking. You were the best player on the team. Okay. You drew the best picture in class, that sort of thing. So that there is comparison involved, and I think it's more helpful rather than fueling this competition or you're better than this person, rather helping kids challenge themselves to continue being better, to better themselves. All right. So you did a great job in the game today. What went into doing that, and what's your goal for the next game? All right. So kind of going beyond some of these really quick things to say, that's probably the lesson for all of us here. Certainly over rescuing kids does not help with self-esteem. So finishing a project for someone, especially if a child gets frustrated, rather than sitting and working through it with them in terms of what are your feelings, what's happening here, how come you can't keep going, why are you giving up, understanding that is much more helpful than saying, never mind, like, I'll just do it myself. Trust me, as a parent, I understand how you can get to that point. But in general, these are things that we want to shoot for. Dismissive comments like, I don't know why you're worried about that. It's super easy. Don't worry. Kind of the don't worry, be happy thing. Does that help anybody? Not really. More important to sit and figure out, why is it you're feeling this way, what's happening. When we say don't worry, we're invalidating feelings. I've talked a lot about that in another video. Sarcasm or teasing about mistakes, of course, is not helpful, doesn't help a kid understand how to overcome that mistake or do better next time. It just is shame based, basically. So kids may just not try because they'd rather not have that feeling and not try to do something again. And then finally, excessive and non-specific praise. So if we're all the time saying, you're awesome, you're such a wonderful kid, perfect, I just love that. Kids get that this praise is not really earned and it's not really sincere. I mean, yeah, we do think they're awesome, but there's an element to it that we all know that we're not awesome all the time, everything we do, right? So there's an element of, not being earned and not really sincere right there. So those are some things not to say, or at least to minimize saying those things. I think we all, on occasion, probably say some of those things. But what could you say instead? And I think that's what's really helpful. So um, instead of just this kind of general praise, use something that's specific. Wow, you did great on that. And you know what I really noticed? That you kept at it even when it was hard. You can really do hard things. All right. So you're giving them more information, or you might say, wow, I noticed, yeah, you did great on that test. And here's what I noticed. You studied more than you ever have, or you studied every night, or you gave it, whatever it is, you practiced so hard. You were out in the yard kicking that ball over and over, shooting that basket. So helping them understand the elements that go into success, not just, wow, great job. We want to normalize mistakes, all right? And we want, everybody makes mistakes sometimes, and ask kids, what did you learn from that mistake? So help them see that making a mistake is a method of learning. We all learn from our mistakes if we will use them that way. When you can, offer genuine choices to them. So if they're reluctant to do one thing, then perhaps they could do something else. Choices are always a great idea. So if you're having a hard time, let's say, finishing a report, writing the conclusion, maybe you say, well, rather than typing it out, what if you just talk to me and tell me what you want it to say? What do you think ought to go into this paragraph? Let's just work it out verbally, and then you could get it down in writing. All right, so think about different ways that they can tackle things when there is resistance. Model for yourself self-compassion. This is one way to help kids feel okay about themselves even when they make a mistake. So rather than beating yourself up and saying, I can't believe I did that, model for kids, I made this mistake today. I really felt so bad about it, but you know what? Here's what I learned. So you're doing all of those things. You're letting them know that mistakes are okay, not just for them. You're not just talking about it. You're walking the walk, as they say. Don't just talk about it, walk the walk. And I think that's important for ourselves as well. Finally, we want to celebrate character, not just outcomes. So there's really some very actually kind of disturbing research that's done that kind of shows that many times we push so hard for kids to be accomplished and successful, and we don't nearly push as hard for kids to be caring, to be kind, to show compassion to other people who are in the race, so to speak, to be understanding of other people. So in the midst of all that we're trying to help our children accomplish and be in life, help them learn to be kind to others and to recognize the feelings in others. And that's we can do that simply by pointing it out to them when we see it happening. I noticed you really helped out that new kid. They didn't have anybody to sit with at lunch, and you let them sit with you. You invited so and so to play with you, and I know that made her feel great. You shared with your brother today that, I just really like the way that you have understanding and compassion for him when he gets frustrated. Okay. So point out ways that they are developing character and showing kindness and concern and compassion to others. And that certainly is probably more important, at least equally important, to being successful in all of the different endeavors that children's practice. All right. So I hope that's helpful. I know this was kind of a long video, but I think there's a lot to be said about self-esteem. I'm going to follow up with some picture books that I think help illustrate some of these things that we're talking about today. So as always, thanks for all that you do for kids, and thanks for listening.